Hi, I'm Dr. Courtney, Jesus Professor, and in this episode of Debunking 101, we're talking about Occam's razor. Occam's razor and similar appeals to simplicity, often called parsimony, is a philosophical preference. It's not an epistemological principle. Arguments involving parsimony are often used to favor a strictly materialistic explanation of origins because supernatural explanations seem more complicated. But Occam's razor is neither a necessary supposition for science, nor is it a scientific result. Strictly followed, Occam's razor demands that we accept the simplest possible theoretical explanation for existing data. However, science has shown repeatedly that future data often supports more complex theories than existing data. So, why should we be so sure that the simplest theories are always the right ones? We shouldn't. Science has a preference for the simplest explanations that are consistent with the data, but history shows that these simplest explanations often yield to complexities as new data becomes available. Occam's razor originally rejected DNA as the carrier of genetic information in favor of proteins, since proteins provided the simpler explanation at the time. Likewise, at one time, Occam's razor rejected the heliocentric model of the solar system, the sun-centered model of the solar system, in favor of the geocentric or earth-centered model, and it would have been certainly viewed, and Occam's razor would have certainly viewed Kepler's laws or Newton's laws as unreasonably complicated had they been offered in Galileo's time. Theories that reach far beyond the available data are rare, but general relativity provides one example. In hindsight, one can argue that it's simpler to consider DNA as the carrier of genetic information because it uses a smaller number of building blocks, the 4 nitrogenous bases. However, during the time that proteins were the favored genetic medium, it seemed more complex as a hypothesis to confer genetic information in the DNA rather than in proteins. One can also argue, in hindsight, for atomic building blocks of matter because it provides a simpler explanation for the observed reversibility of both mixing and chemical reactions as simple separation and rearrangements of the atomic building blocks. However, at the time, the atomic theory was considered more complex because it inferred the existence of invisible particles that had not yet been directly observed. In the same way, hindsight argues that postulating the ether is more complex than transmission of light through a vacuum. However, at the time, all known waves propagated through a physical medium, and it seems simpler to postulate the existence of a medium rather than theorize about wave propagation without a medium. Quantum electrodynamics eventually showed that the vacuum is not complete nothingness, but it is something of a medium with which light and fundamental particles interact. That came a lot later. But likewise, Newton's idea of light particles seemed simpler than Young's idea of waves, so many claimed to the idea of light as particles rather than waves until more convincing evidence was presented. The point is, it's not possible for Occam's razor to be a scientific principle rather than an aesthetic preference because a consistent definition of simple or simpler is absent. Which is simpler, particle or wave, ether or vacuum, flat earth or round, protein or DNA? Occam's razor is also less than general in biological approaches to historical questions. For example, DNA testing would conclude with a very high level of certainty that I am the natural father of 7 children. My birth certificate says that I was the result of a single birth. All of the children were born after I was married, even though only 4 were born to my wife. It would seem that my wife has a solid case for divorce as the simplest explanation for the data above. And the mothers of the other 3 children would have a solid case for paternity suits. Occam's razor would have me in dire straits indeed. My children are DNA matches with the siblings of the other 3 children. But the fact is, I only fathered the 4 children that were born to my wife. The other 3 children were fathered by my identical twin brother. But Occam's razor would conclude that I must be the father of all 7 until paternity analysis progresses to the point of distinguishing between children of identical twin fathers. This might not ever happen. My birth certificate that says single birth is in error because it is a reissued certificate that's simply wrong. We suspect that since we were born in New Orleans, Louisiana, Hurricane Katrina destroyed our original birth records, and the reissue did not have a record that we were twins. Which is simpler, to believe that a man whose DNA matches paternity for 7 children really fathered all 7, or to believe that 3 of those other children were fathered by an identical twin brother whose existence cannot be proven because the birth records were destroyed in Hurricane Katrina. Occam's razor is simply not a reliable mechanism for revealing truth in cases of incomplete information. Should not all sciences play by the same set of epistemological rules? Is not the foundation of all sciences that repeatable experiment is the ultimate arbiter of theoretical validity? If Occam's razor is to be one of the epistemological rules, then we should demand that it would be completely general and applicable of all the sciences without exception. We've given many disproofs by counterexample for Occam's razor. Occam's razor is not completely general in any single discipline, much less all of them. 3 axioms presupposed by the scientific method are realism, the existence of observable natural laws, and the constancy of observable natural law. Rather than depend on the provability of these axioms, science depends on the fact that they have not been objectively falsified. Occam's razor and related appeals to simplicity are epistemological preferences, not general principles of science. The general principle of science is that theories or models of natural law must be consistent with repeatable experimental observations. This principle rests upon the unproven axioms mentioned above. Occam's razor supports, but does not prove, these axioms. As discussed above, there are many examples where Occam's razor would have picked the wrong theory given the available data. Simplicity principles are useful philosophical preferences for choosing a more likely theory from among several possibilities that are each consistent with the known data at the time. However, anyone invoking Occam's razor to support a particular model should be aware that additional data may well falsify the model currently favored by Occam's razor. One accurate observation of a white crow falsifies the theory that all crows are black. Likewise, a single instance of Occam's razor picking a wrong theory falsifies the razor as a general principle. In addition, proponents of Occam's razor fail to acknowledge that if multiple models of natural law make exactly the same testable predictions, they are equivalent, and there is no need for parsimony to choose one that is preferred. For example, Newtonian, Hamiltonian, and Lagrangian classical mechanics are equivalent. Which one of the three would be favored by Occam's razor? Is this a justification for saying the other two are wrong? Likewise, how would advocates of simplicity principles arbitrate between the wave and the matrix formulations of quantum mechanics? Science neither demands nor provides arbitration between models which make exactly the same testable predictions. Well, praise the Lord Jesus. We do have His Word made sure. He did provide proof through His resurrection that He has set a day that He will judge the world with justice by the man He has appointed. For He has given proof of this to all men by raising Him from the dead.
If you see what I see, that the grave is empty, then you know what I know. Anything is possible. If you see what I see, that the grave is empty.